Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the MIT AI conference. And our first session, which is Virtuality and Social Impact by Dr. Fox Harrell, who is the professor of digital media and AI in Comparative Media Studies program and computer science at CSAIL at MIT. In addition, he's the director of the MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality. Fox, thanks for joining us this morning. It's good to see you and welcome.
Thanks, likewise. It's my pleasure. So today I'll be talking about virtuality and social impact. And so in particular, using computational technologies such as interactive narrative, virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on to address social issues both in the workplace and more broadly globally. So just by way of introduction a bit more, I'm the director of the MIT Center for Advanced Virtuality. We've existed for about 2 years now, and our mission is to pioneer innovative experiences using technologies of virtuality. A lot of people think that that just refers to headset-based experiences, but really it's any computing system that constructs imaginative experiences atop our physical world. So we take a unique approach to doing this. And the hallmarks of our approach are as follows. Our approach to engineering and creative practice pushes the expressive potential of technologies of virtuality. We simulate social and cognitive phenomena, and we intrinsically consider social and cultural impacts. That means we build anything ranging from a VR system that's aiming to address racial bias within the classroom, a system that I'll talk about today that addresses sexism in the workplace. We built works to help create a more discerning public around synthetic media, deepfakes, and misinformation. So a whole host of kind of social and cognitive phenomena, always doing the research to ensure that we have the impact that we aim to, as well as the development of these kind of systems. That is, we have both lab and studio in one, as well as a salon for intellectual engagement, and also a hub to connect student groups together. Most recently, just advised a student group on creating an augmented reality version of MIT Commencement, where students could see themselves within a virtual reality system, actually crossing the stage virtually. So I should start just by mentioning that virtuality, again, is not just VR. A lot of people imagine only the particular hardware forms that are used to achieve experiences of virtuality. But the virtual selves that we create to inhabit these kind of spaces, whether they're graphically realized or realized through e-commerce or through social media, that also is within the purview of virtuality, as well as AI-generated synthetic media, so a host of types of technology. So today, I'll focus just on interactive narrative systems for social impact. I should say, though, we also do AI-based analysis of systems such as social media, video games, virtual worlds, etc. So for instance, we analyzed a best-selling computer video game, and we're able to show that if you play in the typical play patterns, then you're disadvantaged data structurally to play as a female character or for certain kind of groups. And that was a game that outsold on its first day of release, Star Wars on its best weekend by about a factor of 9. So it's actually quite a range of influence. But today, rather than our analytical work, I'll focus on our design work. So when I started working in AI and interactive narrative, the common goal was what researchers envisioned was building the holodeck from Star Trek: The Next Generation, a place where you could go in and get any story that you want within a virtual environment and not break the story. So you could become a character in a Sherlock Holmes fiction, and the story will go on in a seamless way that provides you with free play and narrative engagement. So I started actually thinking about what other kind of aims could we have using AI to automatically change stories dynamically. So I thought instead, could we tell stories from different socio-political perspectives? Could we change the cultural worldviews through which stories are told? The themes, or the metaphor. We know different learners use different metaphors in order to learn more effectively. The emotional tone, and more. So that really meant getting into the underlying semantics of our media representations so that they could be dynamically reconfigured based upon user input. This is a challenging problem for several kind of reasons. One is that story content is a challenge because it's highly situationally dependent. It relies on a lot of contextual information to construe and interpret meanings to make them relevant for listeners. So for example, the great author Jorge Luis Borges wrote a story in which a modern author recreates the tale of Don Quixote for the modern age. But if someone was writing it now, it would have quite a different meaning than it did originally when Cervantes wrote it. These subjective issues aren't usually seen as amenable to computational approaches, because it involves the literary studies, the arts, and other areas, not only the technical side. And we need computing approaches that are aimed at providing salient, culturally and aesthetically rich systems. That means we can't just focus on system design, we have to focus on aesthetic design as well. So to give you just one example, I'll describe a system that we built for combating sexism in the workplace. It was built using a custom platform called Chimeria, which was actually patented this year. And it allows stories to be driven by changes of user categories within them. So for example, if you're listening to a music streaming site, the nuanced changes of your preferences over time, how you're categorized with degrees of membership in categories, fluctuating membership, different trajectories, and so forth. And we use that to drive the story. In this case, we use categories that come from social science related to sexism to drive a simulation experience. So Grayscale takes the user through email-based story scenarios and computationally categorizes the type of sexist or non-sexist behaviors that users exhibit. And the system is aimed at engendering user reflection. So in terms of learning sciences, this is a type of reflection that's characterized by an individual's re-examination of the presupposing ideas that inform their beliefs, thoughts, and actions. And so we actually do the work to measure, did people self-reflect, which is important because a lot of work in the area around sexism and sexual harassment only measures completion rate. That is to make sure we have compliance with guidelines around harassment within companies. Not did people actually learn, did they reflect and even change their prior beliefs. So just to give you a sense of what the system looks like, on the front end, we made it look just like a streamlined kind of email interface. You play as a member of a corporation, which is called Grayscale. You are a temporary HR manager within the corporation, and you're managing emails that are coming in. And as you go through the narrative, then this one, we just called from a lot of headlines, the kind of issues that are happening in the spaces. This one is a little more tongue-in-cheek, but it's this idea. Someone wrote to the entire company list, our company has a dress code for a reason. Yoga pants are A, unprofessional, and B, distracting. This is an office, not a gym. Please show some respect for your coworkers and for yourself. And so as HR manager, how would you handle if somebody actually wrote this to the office? For instance, you might say it's not your responsibility to police your coworkers' clothing and refer to policy. You might say that comments about your coworkers' attire being distracting are in fact what is inappropriate. And just to give you a sense of, this is actually able to be run online, so you can get a sense of what it actually looks like. So when you log into the system, you get orientation about your role, how the system works. You have the typical sort of things, all the spam that you might typically have. Prince Demetrius von Dinglehopper wants you to send money to a small island and so forth. And you have profiles of each of the different characters that you might interact with. And as you go through, we start off with just some of the research around office temperature and it being optimized for men's clothes more often than women's clothes. And as you go through it, you have a series of exchanges. So one coworker feels that workplace and the family balance issues aren't being respected. And again, you just have to, so this is Tammy and Barbara are having a dispute about this, and you have to argue about it. If you take certain attitudes, you're going to be categorized by the back end of the system more in a gradient fashion along some dimensions than others. So for example, complementary gender differentiation is a point of view that suggests there are fundamental gender differences in terms of things, like in this case, it's calling one of the colleagues overly emotional and so forth. So a lot of these different themes are built into the system. We have themes in terms of disproportionate rates of bias related to CV, description, gender, name, and much more within the system. So for the sake of time, I won't do a full demo, but again, you can find this online. And so as you go through the system, it's actually tracing not only your degree of membership in these categories, such as unwanted intimacy, a protective paternalistic attitude, complementary gender differentiation, hostile sexism. It's tracing your trajectory. That is, you have a different story if you move from being non-sexist to showing paternalistic attitudes or vice versa, or any number of trajectories through the back-end categorization. It's also, this kind of game represents what's often called a psychosocial moratorium, or at least called that by the researcher Jim G, which means you can actually rehearse and play through these kind of experiences with lower stakes than you have in the physical world in order to better understand the phenomenon. So this just shows the kind of back-end type of trajectory that you might find. And this is actually just a trace of a lot of different kind of paths through. There's a huge number of possible narrative eventualities for the system. We also have thematic endings that are triggered. So for instance, you might, if you acted in a hostile sexist way, you get an ending. Grayscale has concluded that morale at your branch may have been better if you had intervened more. This is going to get bad press. Do something quickly or there will be consequences. But even if you were non-sexist, then it seems that your management strategy has been working for now, but and things are on the rise for improvement. But be aware, if this trend does not persist, they might go back to the old way of doing things. So it also represents the kind of challenge of being a change agent around these kind of issues in a DEI. We did evaluation. The key point here is just to say that all of the study participants actually showed reflection on the themes, and 1/3 of the participants actually showed a disposition towards behavior change, which we thought was notable, and again, much further than just completion rate. We also wrapped it in online courseware where you debrief about the experience and learn actually about the phenomena, how to name them and recognize them when you step away from the experience. So I'll conclude by just mentioning one final example, which is called The Enemy by Karim Ben Khalifa. And you could think about this as using a VR system for peace that humanizes the other in the face of war. I worked with my colleague and a good friend, Karim, on this as a human-computer interaction producer to make the system respond dynamically to your body language as you go through it, as a proxy for your nervousness and bias. This was written up a number of different places, shown Tribeca Film Festival, elsewhere, and made some impact. But the main aim of the work is that you walk into a space and you see combatants from either side of two different conflicts in Gaza, East Congo, gangs of El Salvador. And they're asked basic questions like, why do you fight? Have you killed before? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What's peace for you and what's war for you? And then based on the trajectory through this experience with your body language, you will have prompts by the system that makes it dynamic, that notices if you listen to one more than to the other. And if you've moved in a trajectory from listening to only one to listening to both by the end of the experience. And at the very end of the experience itself, you actually see yourself in a virtual mirror that shows you look like the enemy that you actually were least comfortable with. That is, if you were raised like your enemy, you could become your enemy. You also have ambient feedback, as you see here with skylights. If you're very nervous, then the cloud cover comes in, the light goes dimmer. If you're very attentive, the light is brighter. So we give a range of different types of feedback as you go, some very direct and some more ambient. There's an AR version as well as a VR version, and also ancillary app that gets a sense of what that gives information about the back end of the conflict. As well, we also do registration to understand your relationship to the social issues. You always get the conflict that you were least familiar with first and the one you're most familiar with at the very end. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like, I'll show a brief trailer and then wrap up.
Too close to really phenomenal.
The enemy was born out of my frustration as a photojournalist and war correspondent. For almost 20 years, I have photographed conflicts and witnessed the consequences of huge geopolitical shifts. When I became a father, I simply knew I could not keep working on the front lines. Yet, I was not done trying to understand wars. My friends in Israel, when they know I'm heading for Gaza, can't help themselves but to wish me luck and to stay safe. They believe a lot of people in Gaza are irrational. Also, when I spend weeks working in Gaza and I'm about to return to Israel, my Palestinian friends are telling me the exact same thing. Be careful there. The project is rooted in my experience as a war photographer, going from one side of the front line to the other, and finding that the fighters' dreams, hopes, and nightmares are often more similar than they are different. So there is a bigger story than the war itself, and this is the one I want to explore and share. For the enemy, I am using the latest technologies in virtual and augmented realities, so you can engage directly with the combatants and meet them, hear them, and feel them the way I did. In many parts of our world, you create an enemy as a kid without having met your enemy, because the society around you has created an enemy in the other. So the question is, could I be you if I was on the other side?
Right. So we've, I mentioned we do a number of types of work. We most recently have been doing work in progress using VR to address issues of bullying, as well as issues of racial ethnic aggression, and just a lot of other topics that are social issues of our time. So in conclusion, I believe that innovation in virtuality is crucial because nearly everyone uses technologies of virtuality these days. And back where we started, our approach to engineering and creative practices pushes the expressive potential of technologies of virtuality, simulates social and cognitive phenomena, and intrinsically consider social and cultural impacts. So thank you, and actually we'll be using the conference site for a Q&A, and I'll be happy to take some questions. Oh, so one of the first question that I see, that I see here is have we used immersive experiences where the user assumes the identity of a different ethnicity to experience that culture. So first of all, a lot of the way that we think about it is that there are a lot of VR systems that reduce the experience of identity, in fact, just to visual, graphical, avatar appearance. And we actually believe that you have to simulate very particular social phenomena instead. So we will take the latest research on a particular model of sexism in the workplace, a particular model of racial microaggression and so forth, and implement that model. And the aim is not to understand, it's that you cannot walk in the shoes of another person through a short experience. You can get a glimpse of it, but I think about it more that you learn some of the systematicity of those experiences. So an analogy would be if you create a game about, say, insect life cycle from egg up through adult larvae pupa and so forth, you don't expect students to then understand, well, this is what it's like to be a butterfly. Actually, you want them to learn the systematic kind of life cycle of the insect, and that's a similar thing here. We want them to learn the systematicity of these kind of experiences. So, and we have done one recently that actually models not just being a member of a different culture, but how you are socialized to see different groups. That is, are you socialized to be colorblind, prepared for bias, or understand the histories of each of those groups? So, one, how do we establish trust with participants that the virtual experiences and points of view are portrayed without bias? So first of all, with The Enemy, Kareem is a war photojournalist by training. And so that particular project used all the practices of good journalism. So in terms of their consent for participation, they know the aim, it's completely transparent. Those soldiers were not just our synthetic creation, that was a body scan of them. So when you see Patient, for example, or Jean Didou, these are two of the soldiers, they were actually body scanned there in Congo, for example, outside of the mines. So they're all complicit in terms of the aims of the work. And that was one thing we were gratified in the article by the New York Times about this piece. The journalist said, is this a form of journalism? And he said, yes, it undoubtedly is. It's just a new form of journalism. So there's a question about what are some of the more non-obvious ways we see the current COVID situation pushing us towards or away from our digital experiences? So one is that I think that we already have blended identities, or some researchers use the term faceted identities. That is, we distribute different aspects of identity across different kind of platforms and use them for different things. But I think that with social distancing and so many people going onto virtual platforms for communication, it's just highlighted this kind of phenomenon. So institutions that might have formerly seen virtuality as nice to have, see it as a must-have. So for instance, I co-convened a workshop with a lot of the major cultural institutions in New York City and other places nationally, Museum of Modern Art, MIT's own museum, a number of other museums, Crystal Bridges in Arkansas. And we were having a discussion about what does exhibition and curation look like in the era of social distancing. And the aim is not to see virtuality as something that will augment, because obviously there is a deficit from the physical world experience in a lot of ways, but there are particular things we can do, like personalize the experience for diverse user groups. So we created an exhibition for the Universal Hip Hop Museum, which is going to open up. And if you go to this, you interact with a chat agent that we implemented, that if you listen to any genre of music, country and Western, classical, it'll construct a narrative experience for you that has the soundtrack, that has your own taste, hip hop music with samples from that music on a theme of your interest, like the self-representation of women in hip hop. And using that kind of personalization is a unique experience of a unique aim of these kind of possibilities with these kind of technologies.
Fox, Thank you
Yes.
so much. I hate to interrupt, but we're at the end of the session time. This has been so phenomenal learning about all of the work that you're doing in regards to our workplaces and war zones and the Hip Hop Museum. Really phenomenal. Thank you for your time, and we appreciate you.
Thanks so much. The pleasure has been all mine.
All right. Take care. And for all of our viewers out there, we'll see you on the next session in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.